Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rose Report. Tonight, I'm joined by Calvin Robinson, an Anglican deacon in the Free Church of England and a commentator in the UK. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
So I wanted to have you on because I've seen you a lot in UK media and the US media, and I've noticed that you've talked quite a bit about the impact of your church for young people in the UK. So just to start off, how does your church serve young people in the UK and reach out to them in a way that maybe other churches haven't?
Honestly, by just doing church, by just focusing on what the church has done for 2,000 years. I think the mistake that a lot of churches make today is by trying to reach out to the young people. And there's always this assumption that young people are a particular demographic that like particular things. And people often forget that young people are just as diverse as any other type of demographic. There will be people that prefer traditional worship, people that prefer more evangelical worship. There will be people that prefer liturgical, people non-liturgical. It doesn't make sense to try to attract a younger crowd. I think the approach to take is to focus on what has been known to work traditionally and just do church.
And that's interesting because here in the US, we have quite a few youth efforts, but we don't necessarily have a spread the faith effort. So are you seeing a lot of young people interested in just faith as a concept or trying to get back to faith right now?
Absolutely. I think there's kind of a counter revolution going on because in the secular world, people are free in the loosest term of the word to do whatever they like. Like people are free from God, people are free from consequences, people are free to do whatever they want without any consequence for the wider community or for themselves. And that's actually not freedom. That is just slavery in sin. That is people being trapped in debauchery and degeneracy. And actually, true freedom comes from God. True freedom comes within the boundaries of the Holy Scriptures. It comes, boundaries in general. People need to know what is ordered, what is not ordered, what is good and what is evil. And without that, we're lost. So I found that people are searching and people are looking for faith, and they're looking for it in lots of different ways. But this is why we have to be true to the faith and try not to make our churches appear just like any other secular society, any other secular club, because it's not a society, it's not a club. Church is the body of Christ. It's different, it's true, and it's holy.
And I wanted to know because of that, because you're seeing more of an influx here in the US, we're seeing a lot of people who are entering their early 30s, who seem to be, without a guide, who seem to be struggling. Maybe they've been very successful professionally, but personally in relationships, they're really struggling. So there is sort of this influx in the early 30s range. Are you seeing that in the UK? And if so, are they being vocal about it? Are they sharing why they're coming back to church or discovering church for the first time?
Yeah, massively so. This is the case that we've been told for so long that we have to strive for, we have to worship mammon. We have to strive for career ambitions and goals. We have to try to earn a certain amount of money to be successful. And being successful is all that matters. And it's about your place in the world rather than focusing on what's right and true. And actually, rather than looking inward, looking outward or looking upward. So rather than thinking, what makes me personally happy and chasing that, because that's a never-ending obsession that you cannot ever actually achieve. If you set your goal and I want to earn £1 million before I'm 30, you earn that £1 million and then what? Either you're lost of objectives or you have to set an even bigger one. And it's not fulfilling. You don't find contentment in that way. If we focus on what the scriptures show us and how to live a good life rather than how to live a nice life, what is good is a family. It's finding someone to marry, preferably quite young, settling down, starting your own family for the greater worship of God and centering your life on Christ. So going to church as a family, teaching your children what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, and there you find fulfillment. Of course, you can do other things, like you can make money, you can become successful in the secular world too, but not for your own personal wealth or gain, but because the whole purpose of creating wealth is to distribute wealth. The whole purpose of earning money is so that you can give to charity. If you're not doing that, it's selfish, it's sinful, and it's actually more lonely.
And we noticed here there's a lot of pushback against young people finding any sort of religion. So there is a very antagonistic attack from other young people who are maybe not finding religion, or even just older people who see it as sort of going backwards. Is there that antagonism in the UK against faith right now?
Yeah, of course. It's like, it's old-fashioned, it's outdated. Like you say, it's backwards. But what's wrong with that? I think if we look at the world around us, where people are lonelier, more isolated, more lost than they've ever been, even though we're richer than we've ever been. I mean, if you look at the poorest people in our Western societies now, they've all got $1,000 mobile phone, smartphone, for example. Like we're so much richer financially than we have been throughout history. Yet we are poorer in our spirit. And if we look at what's going on around us and think, actually, this isn't right, something isn't quite right. What's missing? That missing element is Christ. That missing element is faith. And so when people say, actually, I want to do something slightly different, why people reject that, why they look down their noses at us, is because they realize that something's wrong in themselves too and in their world too. And actually, by living a Christ-like life, by living a holier life, disregarding the worldly norms, you're setting yourself apart, and that disturbs people because it's their own insecurities that they're seeing in themselves. It's not you that they have an issue with; it's themselves, because they're not looking for the truth. They're not looking for beauty. They're not looking for goodness. They're looking for personal selfish gain, and they know that that's not what they should be doing.
And in terms of looking for that, I think there's been this sort of false idea that young people are so liberated and happy now, that there is all this happiness and nothing needs to be corrected. Are you seeing like sort of this generational sadness a little bit in young people who are struggling? Because here it's almost like we're not allowed to say there's any sadness. We're not allowed to say there's any loneliness or problems because we're supposed to be so far in the progressive future that's supposed to be ideal.
Yeah, the numbers speak for themselves. The statistics show that young people are more depressed now than they have ever been. And I'm like, why is that? You know, if they all have cars, they all have smartphones, they all have PlayStations, Xbox, flat screen TVs, they all go to university now. So everyone's incredibly intellectual and educated. Why are people more depressed now than they were previously? What is missing? And again, it always comes back to the faith. And we find that people who are rooted in something bigger than themselves, i.e., God, are happier than people who are constantly searching for something within, because you'll never find it within yourself because that's not where it exists. So yeah, I think the divide is between those who have realized that and those who haven't yet. And I think it's on young people that are spiritual, are in connection with Christ, to kind of live a Christ-like life as an example to people around them. So I'm not talking about going out and preaching. I mean, if you want to do that, fantastic. But I'm just talking about living a Christ-like life, and people see that as a positive, attractive alternative. There's something special about that.
And just to switch gears a little bit, we recently had the coronation in the UK, and a lot of conservatives here are a little bit confused about why it should be so important, why so many, countries around the world want to cover it and send their representatives there. So as someone in the UK, why is it so important to the culture there, or to the morale?
Well, in America, you have the allegiance to the flag. In the UK, we swear allegiance to our king, and that's a physical embodiment of what it means to be British. It's someone that lives, is born, grows old, and dies. It reminds us of the cycle of life. It reminds us that we are mortal. It reminds us of our connection to each other. But it's also important because we are living beings, and we worship a living God. And in that ceremony, that is what it's all based on. The first thing that King Charles said was not that what was it? I come not to be served, but to serve. And I mean, that's servant leadership that we learn from Christ. And the whole service was a Christian service. There was a consecration, there was an anointing, there was a Eucharist, the Holy Communion. It was all centered around Christ, actually, the King of Kings. But of course, our King is there to serve us as a people, but he's also there to serve the King of Kings, and to remind us that that's where it's divine authority. That's where any earthly power comes from him. So all of it is kind of linking us and rooting us and bedding us in our Christendom that we still embody.
And I think that might be a misconception here, how much of a faith element there is, because we see like the pomp and the pageantry and the stories, but that reaffirming back to the center sort of gets lost in the shuffle. And in your view, what is the role of the monarchy in the modern day Britain? Because obviously things have changed since the late Queen came to the throne. It's a different setup. There's different players. So what does the monarchy do for Britain at this point in history?
The monarchy is our checks and our balances. So we have a constitutional monarchy. So we have a parliamentary democracy. We elect parliamentary representatives to represent us as constituents, and they can never do anything too outlandish. They can never do anything they can never become fascist dictators, because
Mhm.
whatever they want to pass has to get royal assent. Now, the king himself has no real power other than the power of veto. So he could say, no, that's not going to happen. So it's kind of a protective measure for the people, against Parliament and against tyranny and dictatorship. It's much like your First and your Second Amendments, really, but it's a physical embodiment of that. But also, just having a monarchy roots us in our tradition. The first king of England was enthroned in the 10th century. We've had over 1,000 years of this lineage, maybe not direct lineage, but at least the tradition and the as you call it, the pomp and ceremony, but the service, that coronation service, much of that will not have changed in 1,000 years, and that's something that no other country in the world can say they have.
And do you see the coronation and sort of this resurgence in interest in the monarchy leading to any sort of resurgence in faith in a lot of people? Because we did just millions witnessed a massive Christian ceremony. They witnessed the king make vows and the queen make vows. So is there going to be, in your mind, sort of any good fallout from this on the faith level?
Absolutely. We had 20 million people tuning to watch a Holy Communion service.
Right.
They watched they watched our Prime Minister reading from the epistles. They watched the gospel being read, and they saw the body and blood of Christ being consumed. This is significant, and it's one of the biggest episodes of mission and evangelism in the world. The biggest one since Her Majesty the Queen's funeral, which was the biggest ever since the resurrection. I don't think there's 28 million people tuned in for that. I don't think there's ever been a Christian service bigger than that. So that's a fundamentally important thing that our monarchy does, and not to forget, our monarchy spread Christianity around the world, and they're still doing it, but in a different means.
So would you say that the prime minister is also able to work with the monarch? Because in the US, we have this idea of how do you have someone over the person who's been elected? So that person, the monarchy is not really over the prime minister, you would say, or over the government. They're just sort of acting as a checks and balances system.
No, they are over them. They still
Are they
are
over them?
over them. They don't have, so they don't have the power of an absolute monarch, so they can't rule us. They reign, they don't rule. But the prime minister serves at the behest of the king, and the prime minister can remove the king can remove the prime minister, and only the king can institute a new prime minister. So whenever we have an election, the leader of the winning party goes to the king and asks for permission to form a government, and only the king can dissolve a parliament and all of that kind of stuff. So the king does sit above the prime minister, who is the elected official, but that's because the king is part of the country. The king is the stability. Like, the king might see 10, maybe 20 prime ministers in his time, but the prime ministers come and go, but the king remains. So, I mean, in a US Republican system, the president is both the elected official and the head of state. And for me personally, that's too much power for one person to hold, because what are the checks and balances to hold them back if they remove the executive that are challenging them, like our prime minister did during the COVID pandemic. Our prime minister essentially said, we're no longer answerable to Parliament. We have a smaller cabinet that is going to look over laws for the coronavirus and putting lockdowns in place, that kind of stuff. The only person that can prevent that getting any worse is our king. But if it happens in a republic, who can step in and say, no, this has actually reached a point that this is tyrannous? I suppose this is why you have your gun laws as you do.
So you find a lot of comfort in having this sort of protective layer in your country that other countries don't, because you're right. Here, if it goes to Congress and the president signs it, we have pretty much no recourse until the next election. So do you find comfort in this system as you have it now in the UK?
Absolutely. I think the monarchy is a wonderful thing. I wouldn't want to be a democracy without a monarchy. I think I'd prefer an absolute monarchy to a direct democracy.
Well, I think a lot of people right now, based off of certain laws going through, would say the same throughout the world. And I wanted to know, just sort of in closing, what is your message to people who are saying, so many young people are not going into faith, faith is dying out, Christianity is dying out. What is your message as somebody interacting with young people really throughout the world on this level?
I would say, first of all, that's a lie, and ask, why are people wanting to paint that image? It's people kind of projecting, especially when older people talk about young people. It's like, young people are interested in this and that. Again, it's a presumption, and it's an incorrect one. I just got back from Rwanda, where so many young, faithful Christians they inspired me, actually. They gave me enthusiasm just seeing it. And I hope that they bring some of that back to the West, because we, as Great Britain, spread Christianity to these colonies, and I think now it's time for them to return and evangelize us and bring the gospel back to us, because in places like England and America, I think we're losing the gospel actually, and Africa and Asia and the Middle East are actually strengthening their faiths where we're losing it. So it's time for them to come back. But the point is that young people are waking up to what's happening in the West. West society is dying, not by accident, because I would call them neo-Marxists that are attacking us.
Right.
And they're attacking two things, and that is family and faith, because that is the way to break down Western society, because Western society was built on Christianity. And Christianity, it comes down to essentially Christ, but the way we live, it comes down to family and faith. So attack those things and you attack our way of life. So young people, I think, are waking up to that, and whether it's consciously or subconsciously, and the way to fight back against the wokeness and all of the ugliness and the lies that we see around us, the way to revert is to go back to the faith.
And I think that will resonate with a lot of people who don't want to live in the ugliness and want to seek out beauty, especially currently. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can people follow you on social media to keep up with your commentary and your actions?
Thank you again for the invitation. It was wonderful talking to you. People can reach me at calvinrobinson.com. All of my social medias are at Calvin Robinson, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. I've got a Substack as well, which is also Calvin Robinson. So thank you very much.
Perfect. I will link that all below. Thank you so much for coming on the Rose Report.
Cheers. God bless.